Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today webinar actually started from a study that we as Delphy performed for RVO about the opportunities in Northern Zambia for an agro hub. So during today we will share the results of this study. But since originally this was going to be a live session and we're going to present in person and give also space for for you to network and talk with each other, we have decided to expand a bit just a presentation to a more extensive webinar, and also afterwards there will be an interactive session. What I'm going to present now the panelists first of all. So we have quite a diverse group. I myself am Linda Calciolari. I work for Delphy as a project management and consultant, and I was involved in the study for Zambia. Together with us, there is Nukuru Machama-Kalaluka, that is a Zambian entrepreneur that is actually entering the room now, so that's perfect timing. Martine de Jong is my colleague at Delphy, who is also involved in many projects in Africa. And then from RVO, the Dutch entrepreneurship agency, we have Robin Nieuwenkamp and Ivo van der Horst. Yeah, now I start to see everyone. So what we're going to do, how the session is going to be today is that, well, after this short introduction by me, Nukuruma is going to talk to us about, well, the environment in Zambia for agricultural business, and in northern Zambia in particular. He's very well known with the area, so I'm sure he can share very interesting information with us. After that, me and Martina will present the results of the study that was called Pre-Feasibility Study for an Agro Hub in Northern Zambia. And after each session, please feel free to ask. There will be a space for questions. I will explain in a bit how that works in the webinar. After the study, Robin and Ivo will present the financing instruments that are available from the Netherlands Enterprise Agency and some of the experiences with that. And finally, we will end the webinar session, and we will enter a Zoom meeting in which all participants can actually talk, and we can have a more open and somewhat more democratic discussion, because I'm not sure if you realize you're all muted right now. And we'll finally conclude before 12. So as I just said, we have two sessions. So during this session, you will at some point receive a link for the second one. And the difference between the two is that this is a webinar, so you're all muted. To ask questions, which you can do at any point during a presentation, you can make use of the question and answer button that is below, should be below in your screen. And the speaker will be able to see your question and answer. And if we don't manage for time reason, for any reason to answer to this question during the webinar, don't worry, because you can bring it to the next session and actually ask it in person. We also are trying a poll function. For instance, let's see if we can make start one now, just to keep you guys a bit active. I'm looking at the director in the corner. Sure. Poll. That's it. So also to get to know you guys a bit. Let's see if you can make use of this. So I think it's interesting also to realize that there is a very diverse audience to this webinar. We have quite a few NGOs and government organizations also in Zambia, and soon you'll get the chance to talk with them. but also quite some private companies from the Netherlands and Zambia. I'm still waiting for the answers of the poll. Ah. So yeah, this is how it's gonna work. So for now, I will just pass the spotlight, the screen to Nkrumah for the introduction about Zambia.
I'm just loading my presentation there. Oh, I'm still muted. All right, good. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. So I just had my presentation loaded. Let me just see the layout. So a slideshow. Okay. I'm beginning. Everyone all trying to get used to the new system of holding meetings on Zoom. So I hope you can all be lenient with me. Okay, so I'm gonna present briefly about the environment, basically Zambia in brief, and the Northern Zambia, which is the focus of a pre-feasibility study for the establishment of an agri-hub. But this is my presentation. So the outline of the presentation is as follows. So first part, I just talk about who I am, and then Zambian agro sector at a glance, Northern Province agro, and then basically the impact of COVID-19 on agro. So that's very brief, and I try to tap into the knowledge of the people on the ground about this. So who am I? So just very briefly, I did university studies in South Africa, at which university, and then 2 universities in the Netherlands, in Helsinki. Presently an international business consultant, so I've got various interests and experiences, but for the sake of this particular event, I'm gonna emphasize on my Dutch connection. So I used to be a policy officer for private sector economics at the Netherlands Embassy in Zambia, and then the Netherlands Embassy in Zambia closed in 2013. So I had the honor to actually set up what was called the Honorary Consulate Plus in Zambia. I was told at the time that there were 2. There was one in, I think, Peru or somewhere in South America, and then the one in Zambia. So I set that up. I was still working on the trade brief. And then afterwards, I've worked on a number of international consultancy assignments, the Netherlands Embassy in Zimbabwe, focused on Zambia. I've done stuff with RVO, the Italian Trade Agency, etc. So basically, the pre-feasibility study that we are discussing today was one of the things that was initiated during my time with the Honorary Consulate Plus, and I've been privileged to be involved with this whole idea since. So, okay, trying to move. Okay, so Zambia at a glance, basically the Zambian agro sector at a glance. I mean, I'm very sure that among participants, of course, there are people who are well acquainted with the sector, but just a few things I try to put together. So one, Zambia's GDP forecast, I mean, at present is expected to shrink by 0.8% in 2020 and maybe rebound by 2.4% in 2021. And basically a number of factors contribute to this. One is basically reduced power generation. So we've had very poor rainfall in the southern part of Zambia, which is where a lot of our electricity generation capacity is based. So the big dams are actually based in the southern part of Zambia, which has had or experienced very poor water supplies or rainfall, which then means that we are not able to run our hydropower. Zambian power generation is basically over 90% of it, about 90% is hydro-based. So that's going to impact economic growth. It has already had an effect. Poor commodity prices also have had an effect on the growth of the country, economic growth of the country. Zambia is predominantly dependent on copper mining. So when there's a slowdown globally, especially in China, which consumes about 40% of global copper output, it affects Zambia as well. Adverse agro output figures, and especially here I'm looking at maize, which is a big part of our agricultural production in the country. So when there's a very poor maize production, that has an effect on GDP. And then now, of course, COVID-19 with all these lockdowns, you know, we've had a partial lockdown, but that definitely will have an effect also on growth. So the estimate, the forecast is about, you know, a shrinkage of, you know, GDP by 0.8% in 2020, rebound about 2.4% in 2021. Now, this contrasts with the recent long-term trend of GDP in Zambia. Between 2004 and 2014, we actually had average GDP growth of about 7.4%. 2019 GDP was 23 billion US dollars. Like I've said, copper mining is a major economic player, but it only employs 2% of the population. So basically, it's capital intensive, but not labor intensive. Agriculture employed, in contrast, 55% of the labor force, but only contributes 8.2% to GDP. So the labor force was about 7 million in 2017. 3/4 of poor people live in rural areas in Zambia. And then there are basically, you could categorize the farmers in 3 categories. So you've got small scale farmers who cultivate up to 5 hectares, medium scale farmers who cultivate between 5 hectares and 20 hectares, and large scale farmers who cultivate above 20 hectares. So the large scale farmers only consider about 4% of farmer households. Yeah, and then they cultivate 22% of the arable land. Zambia has about 40 million hectares arable land. Of course, the distribution of farmers between small, medium, and large scale differs depending on which part of the country you're talking about. So that is Zambia and the agro sector, the Zambian economy broadly and the agro sector at a glance. So then I zoom in on Northern Province, which is a point of interest. So for Northern Province, 70 to 85% of households engaged in farming. Small number of livestock per household, so relatively, so that's compared to other parts of the country. So percent of national totals in 2017, for example, so cattle, cattle in Northern Province only had 1.3% of the total cattle held in the country. Goats 6.1%, sheep 2.3%, pigs 4.5%, and poultry is unknown, but relatively low commercial activity. So of course, almost all the households have got like some poultry, but this is not done at the commercial, sort of like commercial level. So that's Northern Province. And I've seen big companies like Mega Eggs, they're from the Copper Belt, so they supply eggs in Pulungu, so those are poultry products. So not large-scale poultry activities undertaken within Pulungu itself, or in this part of the Northern Province, but then produced elsewhere and brought to a place like Pulungu, for example. Zambia, and there was another Somali-owned abattoir, I know in Bala, that actually closed down. Because they were premised on basically getting meat supplies, beef supplies from Tanzania into Zambia. And because of all these disease outbreaks, sometimes the borders are closed. So I think for them it's been difficult to run the abattoir. But then this then shows that there's very low level of let's say, cattle herding, people keeping cattle within the Northern Province itself to sustain these kind of like commercial abattoirs, and they had to base most of their production and processing on imported livestock from Tanzania. Northern Province has above 1,000 millimeter precipitation rainfall. That contrasts with about 600 millimeter in parts of Zambia, especially in Southern Province, and it's got a relatively long rain season. So that, in a sense, is an advantage for the region. There's sufficient rainfall in the region. The main crops for Northern Province are cassava, beans, maize, groundnuts, and then it's the highest beans production area in the country. Coffee is also commercially grown, so there's a multinational company, Olam, is producing coffee in Kasama and Bala, and then avocados are also abundant, but then these are not really commercially no large-scale commercial avocado production. Mangoes as well, I would say, but this is also not commercial or large-scale. Right, with capture fisheries are declining because, I mean, we've got the lakes there like Lake Tanganyika, which previously was very big source of fish in the country, but the fish stocks have declined. And so now we're having fish imported into the province from the Great Lakes. So countries like Tanzania, for example, DR Congo, people bring fish, dried fish, etc., trade it in a place like Mpulungu, and then in exchange they buy other goods and take them out. And then there's also fish that's imported from other parts of Zambia. So now you've got companies in a place like Mpulungu, I know in Bala, like Capital Fisheries, bring in fish from other parts of the country into the northern province. So this is a change from what it was in the past when the place was actually a production base. What it also means is that the people who were previously engaged in fishing, for example, are now becoming, they're trying to become farmers, but it's a very difficult transition, as you must guess. Most agro products are locally traded except maize exports, but these maize exports are occasional, so it all depends on the government policy at the time. So at some point you have Zambian government effecting export bans because they want to promote local food sufficiency. But when there's no ban, you have significant, maize exports also routed through Mpulungu port, for example. Cassava exports are mostly informal. I've seen, last time I traveled, for example, in DRC, and I was in Uvira, and I saw large stacks of cassava that had been imported from Zambia into DRC. But this is done mostly informally and unrefined. Like I mentioned earlier, there's international livestock trade, mostly cattle, and mostly informal between Zambia and Tanzania. Through Mbala, there's a border there. So people just walk across with the cattle, but this is affected also by the disease burden. So when there's foot and mouth disease, for example, then the borders are closed. And so Northern Province, and especially a logistics platform like Mpulungu Harbour, is actually a platform for international transit agro livestock exports. So I've seen, for example, at the port, refrigerated containers of, for example, poultry products being exported through Mpulungu port to the Great Lakes region, and they were coming from Alvis Bay. So it's a transit point for livestock agro exports. But then, of course, it begs the question, why not produce and export from Zambia and from Northern Zambia to the Great Lakes, and rather than import all the way from Brazil? But I've seen this happen before. But that's a question for the people in the webinar today. One of them at least. So the upsides of Northern Province agro, like I've said, one is availability of land. So we've got low population density there, good rainfall, and then proximity to the Great Lakes region. So which basically means that apart from maybe supplying the domestic market, and Zambia is bordered, by the way, by 8 countries. So rather than just supplying the domestic market, you then have the proximity to the Great Lakes, basically Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and from Burundi, Rwanda, again, the connection there, parts of Tanzania, and I've heard people actually talk about the possibility of exporting all the way up to Southern Sudan. So that proximity to a logistics platform, for example, in Mpulungu, gives the possibility of exporting to the wider Great Lakes region. The downsides, one, trade policy sometimes can be, a constraining factor, especially if you're not able to export things like maize, which is also a staple food in Zambia. Poor productivity levels, so the skills levels are low, especially amongst the small scale farmers, but also maybe you might argue in the medium scale farm sector. At a large scale farming level, commercial farmers, that's a very, very small group, but generally they tend to have more skills and higher productivity rates. Low purchasing power means that the poor can't really afford inputs that they need for farming. And so one has to be very innovative in terms of the financing structures that are created to enable this access. Basically, it's a chicken and egg situation that posed by lack of commodity traders. So on the one hand, you might say, if you had commodity traders operating within the region, they would create a market for people to produce. Is basically they would create an incentive for people to engage in agricultural production. On the other hand, the commodity traders would say, why should I go when there's nobody to produce what I need? So there's a chicken and egg situation. But the lack of a very established commodity trading system there has an effect on production levels, I would say. Then the poor infrastructure, so the physical infrastructure like roads. There's been a lot of investment in Zambia over the years in infrastructure development, especially in roads. But then what we've seen, of course, is insufficient, and in most places also these roads are already, some of them are getting bad. So that's a constraining factor. You know, inadequate warehousing, for example, so storage facilities, there's a lot of production that is wasted because of inadequate storage facilities. I mentioned the underdeveloped commodity trading regime. And then so what effect has COVID-19 had? So here I borrowed, I think there are people also, participants here who I consulted, like the district culture coordinator, so I must say, take this opportunity to thank them. I wanted to find out from their perspective as well what the impact of this has been. And what I was told, for example, is that the interaction between farmers and extension officers, so agriculture extension officers, has been reduced. And this is because when you have a need for physical distancing, it's difficult for people. This is mostly in the past. Knowledge sharing was more done at close proximity. Now it's very difficult to do, and especially when you don't have technology platforms to close the gap, it's a problem. So the interaction has been reduced. The farmer meetings, field days, the shows have been suspended. Some farmers no longer visit district centers to buy inputs or market produce for fear of contracting the disease. And starting June, the situation seems to be normalizing with increased inflow into district centers. But what are the consequences of this? One, vital knowledge cannot be shared with farmers, thereby affecting productivity. Vital farm input cannot be accessed by farmers, thereby affecting yields. Crops haven't been adequately marketed. And so the question, for example, is how will Food Reserve Agency, which is the dominant entity that actually buys commodities from farmers, especially maize, which is being harvested as we speak now. So how are they going to operate in this regime is unclear, because will people congregate at aggregation sites without risking their health? So there are some consequences around this, and this is still playing out. So we still don't know the full effect of this. Yeah, so this is the presentation for now, and then if there will be questions, I think you can pose them through the Q&A platform, and then we can take it from there. Thank you.
Hi, Nkurumah. I think there is already a question, if you wouldn't mind taking a look.
Okay, so now again...
The question is there an integrated development plan for the northern region, and how does the AgroHub fit in?
Well, that's a good question. Look, Zambia has got what is called now the 7th National Development Plan. So that's like an overall plan for the whole country. And it has a number of things that sort of like intentions and aspirations, some of them that are supposed to be achieved through PPPs, for example, private-public partnerships. Now, I would say from my experience, when you have the national development plan like that, it's not at all the case that 100% of what is envisaged in the plan will be implemented, or that it is followed consistently in the way that it is put out. But I would say that the goals and objectives of this AgriHub are largely consistent with what is envisaged in the 7th National Development Plan. So the whole idea, for example, of spreading income to rural areas, involving people that live in rural areas, for example, in production systems that are commercially oriented. So the broad objectives, I would say, are encompassed within the National Development Plan. Districts, I think what's been happening lately is that most of the districts have also been creating their own, what they call integrated development plans. I'm not sure to what extent, for example, the plans for Pulungu and Bala and Senga Hill have been developed. But I think that during the study, one thing that did happen is that the researchers, or the people who were looking into this pre-feasibility study, held interactions with authorities in the 3 districts. So the authorities in the 3 districts were fully aware, and they were supportive of this initiative. So that's what I would say about that for now. If there's anything else related.
Oh, I see a second question, but maybe since we are running short of time, I propose that we bring that to the second part, the interactive session, so it can be better discussed also with input from the participants. So thank you, Nick, for your questions, and we bring them to the later session. Meanwhile, Martina is starting the presentation about the pre-feasibility study. And
yes. Wait a minute. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Well, in last year, we have provided a pre-feasibility study to the possibilities of setting up an agro hub in the northern province of Zambia. We had quite a lot of support from Nkurumah in collecting the right data and interviewing the right people over there and the involved people over there. What we like to present today a bit is some background information on agriculture in the Northern Zambia province. Unfortunately, Nkurumah has already told you a lot, so I would like to highlight just some topics which were less pointed out in the presentation of Nkurumah. We will bring on table some challenges in the region. Also, some of them have been pointed out by Nkurumah already, but I would like to add a couple of issues to them. The value chain approach, why we was supposing that the value chain approach is the correct approach for this agro hub, identification of functions of the agro hub, possible locations, and some next steps, which will be also discussed in the discussion rooms after our presentations. So once agriculture in the Northern Zambia province, as Nkurumah also pointed out, 75 to 80% of the households are active in farming. Be aware that most of them are real SME farming. So that means that they have a site or a plot below 5 hectares. And even of those 5 hectares, just a limited place or area will be used for farming. So there is a lot of available land. However, just a limited part of the land is used for real farming. And most of the SME farmings are self-supporting. So they produce for their own consumption and will bring less to the market. As mentioned by Nkurumah also, is that soils are very favorable for farming, and there is enough water available in the area to do farming. So it is a quite good climate in the area is quite good for farming activities. There is enough precipitation. The rainy season is from October till March. And well, during the dry season, there is a lot of water available in the area, which will be sourced by overland flows. So when you see overall, the area is still very fertile and offers a lot of opportunities for farming. There are just a couple large-scale commercial farmers. Those commercial farmers have acres above 20 hectares. And most of them are funded or are originally related to former British companies or to the coffee farms like Olam Farming, who is present in that area. Katito Farming is present in that area, and also Saisa. So that are just a couple of large-scale commercial farmings. And of course, in the cattle industry, there is Zambia, which is one of the biggest in the Mabala region. Well, the agricultural products, as mentioned by Nkurumah also, livestock is very important in the region, especially around Mabala is a lot of livestock. But also what you now see is that there is some upcoming aquaculture in the area, especially nearby Chila Lake, where you see some initiatives related to aquaculture. And besides the livestock, there is a lot of crops, and most of them are staple crops. So the cassava, mixed beans, and maize production are really huge in that area. When you look at the market, well, there is a quite small local market because, well, more or less 75 to 80% is still involved in farming. They are most self-supporting, so the local market is quite limited. There is a domestic market, Lusaka and the Copperbelt region. However, there is one challenge to reach the domestic markets. For example, when you drive from Mabala to Lusaka, it's a 10-hour drive with a truck. So for staple crops, that is quite a good possibility to travel to Lusaka. However, when you have some crops like horticultural products, then there is a challenge to bring them in good condition also to the markets. The other possibility are the regional markets via the Great Lakes district. On the left, you see a picture of the port in Mapulungu, nearby Lake Tanganyika. Well, regularly there is vessel traffic through the lake. However, also the traffic through the lake is still quite long. So just staple crops will be exported to regional markets like Tanzania, Burundi, Congo, etc. Another possible market, but that is just a very small market at the moment, is the EU and Middle East. In Tanzania, we have an international airport. In Mabala, there is also an airport. However, that is a military airport. And they are working on the relocation of that airport into a commercial airport. And as soon as that is possible, then it offers a lot of opportunities to bring high-value crops also to the EU or Middle East area. But so far, the export to the EU and Middle East is quite limited, and just large commercial farmers are connected to those markets. And for the SME farmers, it is quite difficult to reach those areas. Well, some challenges for that region, also mentioned by Nkrumah. On one side, we have, well, I think that is worldwide an issue. We have climate change, but especially for the Zambian region, Zambian northern province, it means that, well, there will be heavy rainfalls, and so also some flooding in that area can be possible. So far, it is well, quite a good region to work. However, last year, I suppose it was nearby Mapulunga, the lake, that even temperatures above 40 degrees were there during the dry season time. So that is quite a quite hot area. That could be a quite hot area. However, there is also a plateau in that region which offers a bit milder temperatures than the Mapulunga area. As in most African countries, we see a lot of post-harvest losses also in this region due to lacking of quite good storages or the availability of storages. Although farmers do have quite huge plots, they're still facing labor constraints. Most of them work by hand, so there is a lacking in availability of equipment. Sorry. There is a lacking of availability of equipment like tractors or other mechanization equipment, so they still had to work by hand, which is quite challenging. Yeah. Another issue is that there is limited access to inputs. That means no high quality seeds, no fertilizer or lacking of fertilizer, and pesticides are available. But also one of the issues, and that is also the last bullet, is related to power supply. There is a deficit of power in that region. So when we are able, or when you are able to get stable connection of power, that could be a solution for that region. Access to the market, we already mentioned. The distance between Lusaka and the region is a long drive, so it is quite a long distance to come to the markets. Export policies, we have various troubles or challenges to export products to Congo or other areas. And what you see overall, but that is in the whole value chain, is a lack of knowledge and information. That is not just a lack of knowledge on farmers level, but that is also related to storages, to preserve food and vegetables, but also how to add or how to use fertilizer, pesticides, etc. Oh. I think now it is up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So based on the challenges that have been mentioned by Martina, we have come up with the possible functions of a AgroHub. Well, you can see a bit of a visual representation of it in the picture on the side. So we have connected essentially the different challenges with opportunities and functions of the AgroHub, which we see mainly as rental of equipment for both agricultural production and post-harvesting, provision of a storage and cooling space, aggregation and coordination services, and a market for inputs and connected potentially with a credit supply. All of this bridged by provision of knowledge by meaning of training, demonstration, and research. So on the coordination and aggregation part, since we said most of the farmers in the region are SME farmers, and one of the limitations is mainly of trade is the quantity of uniform produce that is provided. One of the functions that the hub could provide is the one of coordinating the farmers. That could be by means, for instance, of an outgrower scheme, but there could be different ways. And aggregation of the produce. So the hub could be an aggregation facility where all the farmers channel their produce until there is a consistent bulk that can be traded. In turn, the hub also provides market information to the farmers and guarantees the good quality and safety of the aggregated produce. Which in turn we expect it will improve the marketability of the product. Besides, another function could be in this process to create and strengthen the sector associations. Then we got the rental of equipment for farming and post-harvesting. This could be because one of the reasons that some of the farmers are not using all of their land is also because of lack of labor. And the moment that machinery is available, that could boost their productivity. But also some of the post-harvesting instruments are not available at the spot. For instance, a grater or a press or a dryers that could be for cassava for the first part of the post-harvesting that increases the lifespan of the produce before further processing. And of course, all these facilities would need to be run by trained staff so that, I mean, everything goes in line with phytosanitary and hygiene measures. I see that a bunch of questions is accumulating on the on the lower part of the screen, so I'm gonna run through this, and then let's hope that we still have quite some time. Otherwise, it goes to the session after. So yeah, input and credit access. So, and this is maybe interesting for instance, the seed companies that I know that are joining. So the hub could be a bit of a marketplace for input providers. It could be the one place to go for farmers to get inputs, credit, energy, supply. Besides being a marketplace, it can also be a demonstration location where the products are actually showcased, because the input supply is quite, the input and their quality is quite inconsistent in the area. That could have a great added value for farmers in the region. And in that case, it could also be interesting to look at possible financing tools that enable SME farmers to access these inputs for an affordable price. So then we have storage and cooling. Especially, this is interesting for all crops, but especially for the high value ones. For crops such as maize, storage places are sometimes available, even though it's very dependent on the area. So the moment that our hub is being set up, it's really important to look on what is already available in the area, specifically close to the agro hub. But the cooling is particularly interesting because it's usually a bigger investment, and that is something that is not widely available and can really boost the feasibility of high value crops that need cooling before being, for instance, shipped to Lusaka. And finally, there is a research, demonstration, and training component, which involves improving or support farmers in improving their practices, while also researching what are the best practices in the area. And well, a number of possible training topics are irrigated farming, selection of varieties, integrated pest management, but also very important business planning, because very often we focus on the agronomy part, but it's also very important to work with entrepreneurs in the end. And then I give the word back to Martina.
Unmute. Yes, we also have looked at some location or possible locations for an agro hub in the region. There have been, well, 4 potential locations identified. It can be nearby Kasama, Mabala, Mapulungu, and well, Chief Tiana Luka, that is one of the chiefs who is active in that region. Which we had a very nice visit with Nkuruma during our trip there. But he has also a lot of land available where we can set up an agro hub. Just in the bottom below, there is a short map, a small map, which pointed out the locations of each of the plots. Kasama, the district of Kasama, did have land available, and they said, well, the availability of the type and the size of the land is very depending on the need. So if we can give them details on the size and the type of lands, or the preferred location nearby the city or more in the open field, and they can support us in finding or selection of the right plot. However, they mentioned also that they need to have relevant stakeholder meetings after we have selected or have given up our features or preferred features for those sites. And based on that, we can see if they have the right land available and if they can provide us with the right land. In the district Mabala, they have 4 plots available. The size, well, I think that is quite enough for an agri-hub. Depends from 250 till 5,000 hectares. And besides, the Mabala district can also contribute us in or support us in finding labor besides next to the land. Also, additional stakeholder meetings can be held as soon as we have pointed out the features of the plots, the desired plots, and based on that, the stakeholders meeting can result in additional contributions. Mapulungu is nearby the lake, nearby Lake Tanganyika. They haven't also defined a final location yet. Also there are opportunities nearby the city, nearby the lake, nearby the harbor, and nearby the port, so to say, or more in the open field. And also they said, well, we need to have a stakeholders meeting as soon as you've given the features of the needed plots, and then we can decide on additional contributions to the plot and to the agri-hub. The site of Chief Chinaluka, however, it is a quite nice place to be, and it is there is no agriculture or less agricultural activity over there yet. It is quite difficult to access to be there, to come over there, and it is far away from the main agricultural centers like Mabala. Mabala is the real center of agriculture in the northern province. And that is quite a long drive from the site from Chief Chinaluka to Mabala. And also, well, the chief is capable or able to support us in land and also in labor. So there is a lot of there are some communities nearby, and they can also provide us with labor if necessary. So those are the 4 potential locations. In my opinion, Mabala is the one who is very nearby the heart of agriculture in the northern province. So that should be a very nice opportunity to set up over there an agri-hub. The advantage of Mupulungu is that it is nearby the port, where is also a lot of transport and vessel transport through the lake, via the lake. So that offers also opportunities. However, the agricultural activities are less in that area. Kasama is also a very good place. It's more on the road to Lusaka, although it is still quite a long drive to Lusaka. But my preference should be Mabala to stay over there. So those were in short the outcomes from our presentation or from our research and our pre-feasibility study. I assume I will give the word. Okay, then in that case, I would like to ask RVO or the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. Robin, I suppose you are the next one to take over the presentation and get us informed a bit more about the funding possibilities from RVO and the Dutch government in the development of an agri-hub in the northern province in Zambia. The floor is yours, Robin.
Thank you, Martina. So my name is Robin Nieuwenkamp. I work at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency.
I cannot hear you. I'm not sure. Yes, okay, it's go. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, I see not, so that's a good sign. So my name is Robin Nieuwenkamp. I work at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and we have funded this this study. I see that we are running a bit out of time, so I will keep this presentation brief. But feel free to ask any questions in the breakout session later. So I work as a private sector development coach for the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, which means that I am very well aware of all the activities that are going on in Zambia that are funded by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. I'm also the first person to be in touch with our embassy in Zimbabwe about the project portfolio and strategic planning of activities in Zambia. And of course, also very well aware of the instruments that RVO has to offer towards entrepreneurs to work on private sector development in developing countries. So just a very brief overview. We don't have a very diverse portfolio in Zambia, also due to the fact that the Netherlands doesn't have an embassy present. So there's limited capacities to support to support individual initiatives. But what we've done over the past years is really focus our approach on the northern part of Zambia, also in relation with different activities that are going on and around Lake Tanganyika to promote regional trade. So there's now about 10 projects that are still running with a project portfolio size of 20 million euros. Mostly active in agriculture and food, and also a lot in the maritime and water sector, focusing on transport over the lake. The RVO instruments can be roughly divided in 4 categories: knowledge and information. We also do a lot of network and contacts events. We have different funding instruments, and we do a lot of promotion and interests. I will focus now on 2 of those, the knowledge and information activities and funding activities. So in addition to the study that Martina and Linda have presented, that Delphy performed, we've actually also done an additional study focusing on the broader regional market around Lake Tanganyika. And we are continuing our work on infrastructural development on and around the lake to further stimulate that regional market, which is now largely informal with small wooden vessels running between different ports in the region. But actually this study has identified quite some potential for more formalized, larger scale trade in the region, especially DR Congo and Burundi are a huge market for agricultural products because there's limited production capacity available locally. And now agricultural materials are sourced from very far away. And actually Northern Zambia could be a very interesting region to increase production to facilitate that regional market. That was one of the findings of this study. And another thing that hasn't been mentioned before is that actually the World Food Programme is really keen on taking Zambia as a source region for their food aid programs in Burundi, DR Congo, even all the way up to Southern Sudan, which could be facilitated through increased agricultural production in the northern province. So then there are there's a number of funding instruments that RVO has available, but these So there are several funding instruments available. I will not go into detail about all of them, but I think the most important ones are our public-private partnerships programs. So I will name 2. The first one is an impact cluster facility. It's a relatively new instrument which we are now developing. It's currently in the pilot phase, and we are working towards a more structural instrument, which will be tendered and can be signed in for by parties. And another one is the Sustainable Development Partnership, Sustainable Development Goals Partnership, SDGP facility. And that one is currently closed, but they are now working on a new tender round for the coming period. We don't really know exactly what it will look like, especially because there's a lot of uncertainty due to COVID-19 when these new instruments should kick off. But the main principle is in fact that we always work according to the Dutch diamond principle. So we always work in our instruments with in a way that we stimulate a partnership between the local private sector, potential Dutch private companies, knowledge institutes, NGOs, and local government. And whereas the SDGP, which some of you might be familiar with over the past years, focuses on larger scale projects up to 6 million euros in size, with a very specific instruction on which partners should be included in the consortium. The impact cluster instrument actually has a smaller ticket size of up to 1 million euros, and more flexibility in its consortium setup. And both are focused on stimulating private sector development locally by improving the value chains, market access, and creating jobs for local youth. And other instruments are focusing more on stimulating the international activities of Dutch companies. One of those is called DHI, which has 3 different tracks that could co-finance demonstration projects, feasibility studies, and investment preparation projects. I'll just stick to the general goals of the DHI program, and then if there are any specific questions, we can deal with those in the breakout session. But basically, it combines the demonstration of Dutch technologies and services, or assessing the feasibility for export or investment, with a potential impact on the local private sector development, adding value, so to say. So these are 3 examples. We will share the presentation afterwards, but due to time restrictions, I will skip these for now and hand over the floor to Ivo van der Horst, who will tell a little bit more about the DGGF, the Dutch Good Growth Fund.
Thanks, Robin. You can hear me? Just checking. Thumbs up. Great. So indeed, I'm Ivo van der Horst. I'm project advisor to the Dutch Good Growth Fund, and also to the Dutch Traded Investment Fund, but that is not of relevance right now. I'm going to tell you just briefly what is possible for you guys potentially at our fund. Thanks, Robin, for clicking. So what you see on your screen is there's 2 pillars right now. First one focuses on investing, importing, exporting consumer goods. So that's something that I'm going to tell you more about in a moment. What I'm not going to tell you a lot about is the second one, which is also on your screen. It's good to know. So that's why it's presented right now and displayed. That is the exporting finance. So you want to export out of the Netherlands towards, well, Zambia. Then it's potentially interest. There's potentially, that's why this might be interesting to you. To get a finance, but we are going to focus on the first pillar. Can you click, Robin? Thank you. So there's 2 within the first track, because that's how we call it. The first track focused on investing in, let's say, in Zambia or in other countries, developing nations, and say you are a Dutch entrepreneur, because that is also important. Then there's two categories. Either you are a starting entrepreneur, so that's less than 5 years, or you are more established. First one is the starters pillar, and the second one is let's say the SME pillar. Say you are older than 5 years, then it's possible to get a loan at the DGGF fund, anywhere between 1 and 15 million, and that goes for market-based interest rates. Of course, in this case, if you want to get these amounts of money, then you need to be established. You have your business plan. You've had success. That is one side. Personally, I am working at the DGGF starters pillar, and that is for entrepreneurs less than that are existing less than 5 years. There's 2 instruments that I want to focus on right now. But just emphasizing, you need to be a Dutch, you need to have a Dutch entity, a Dutch BV to get a finance from DGGF. It's a pretty young instrument, the starters dimension at least. It's only 3 years old. There's 2 instruments, I already said, 2 instruments that I want to focus on. First one is an import finance. Say you have a container of stevia, you want to get that out of Zambia towards the Netherlands. Then you can get a loan that is potentially transferred to a subsidy if something goes wrong. What am I saying here? You need some money to acquire the stevia, you need to container, you need to ship it. Well, until it reaches the port and gets to Dutch soil, say that costs 100,000 euros, and say it's not stevia but something else, something went wrong, then we can transfer, we can change the loan and make it a subsidy. So that covers some risk at your side. And that is the import finance. There's another thing, and that is the starters finance. That is a loan, and that goes for 3% interest. And that is of course you know, money anywhere, in theory, anywhere between 0 and 1 million euros. In this case, you're already having some revenue, you have a business plan, you have proven your concept, but you could use more money and you want to invest in, say, Zambia. Well, well, that can be interesting for you. Where can you think of? Let's say you want to invest in a local production facility. Stuff like that is possible at the GGF as well. Let's see. Can you click for me, Robin? Yeah. So we plan to have some questions. I think with regards to time, that comes that it should be moved over to the breakout rooms, right, Robin? Okay, good. So just so you know, my email was ivo.vanderhorst@rvo.nl. I'll be in the breakout rooms as well, but I hope this short intro was useful already. Thanks.
So thank you, Ivo. So we are done with the presentation for this part. We have answered quite a few questions in the Q&A. Meanwhile, I propose that now we move to the second part of the meeting, the more interactive part. So you all received the link through your email for this meeting. And we created 2 rooms with half of the participant each, so that there is a bit more space for discussion. You will enter the room as muted and with your screen off, because I assume not everyone has the same internet connectivity. Keep it like that, and when you talk, you can unmute yourself and make your point. I guess that works the best. So I close this session now. Thank you so much for your attention, and I see you in the other session.